Hello, everyone. My name is Chanel Blackwood, and I am the marketing manager at IHEA. Welcome, and thank you for registering for today's webinar, Identifying an Appropriate Research Question. Today's webinar will run for approximately 60 minutes and will be recorded and uploaded on our website afterwards. Before we get started with today's session, I just wanted to run through a couple of housekeeping items. If you experience any technical difficulties during today's webinar, please feel free to type them into the chat box at the bottom of your screen, and I'd be happy to assist. Everyone on the line has been muted except for our speakers in an effort to eliminate background noise. If you would like to speak aloud, please feel free to use the raise your hand function and unmute. We'll be holding all questions until the end of the session when we'll open for facilitated Q&A. I'll now pass things over to David. David, over to you. And David, you're muted.
Of course. Thanks, Chanel, for the housekeeping rules. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Well, good afternoon here in the UK, good morning in the US, and good whatever part of the day it is where you are joining us from. I am David Lugo-Palacios, Assistant Professor in Health Economics at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. And it's really a big pleasure for me to welcome you to this webinar on identifying a research question, which is organized by IHEA's Early Career Researchers Special Interest Group. Well, today we have an exciting panel that will discuss two different perspectives on this topic. First, we will have Professor Bruce Hollingsworth from the University of Lancaster in the UK, and then we'll hear from Professor Winnie from Harvard University. As Chanel said, this webinar is being recorded and will be available in IHEA's website. So both the speakers will have approximately 15 minutes or so to present their view, and we will have some time afterwards for some questions and answers. If you have a question for a specific speaker, do please feel free to write it in the chat, or as Chanel said, raise your hand and speak up, but we will be leaving some time after both presentations. So if I may, I will introduce our first speaker, Professor Bruce Hollingsworth, who is Professor of Health Economics and leads the Health Economics at Lancaster Group. His research and international collaborative publications are principally in the area of efficiency measurement with respect to the production of health and healthcare, social determinants of health, and the translation of research into practice. He also runs the International Health Economics Discussion List, which is also on Twitter. He is co-organizer of the Health Economics Study Group in the UK. Was on the International Scientific Committee and was chair of the International Health Economics Association, a student prize committee. And in addition to being an active member of Health Economics, and all this is in addition to being an active member in the Health Economics organization worldwide. He's an invited speaker at many international conferences and to many government bodies. Is a referee for 45 international journals and has over 150 publications. He's also a co-editor of Health Economics Journal. He was on the board of directors of the International Health Economics Association from 2011 to 2017, and he previously worked until 2011 at the Center for Health Economics at Monash University in Australia, where he was director from 2009 to 2011. And he's currently on the board of directors of the European Health Economics Association, ECR. So Bruce, many thanks for being with us today. We are very much looking forward to your presentation.
Thanks, David. That was a very nice introduction, which I wasn't expecting, but thank you. Okay, so what would be nice is we're a small group. I know this is being recorded, but if anyone did feel like putting their camera on, it would be nice rather than presenting to a lot of names. That would be nice. We could make it a bit of a group where we could see each other. You don't have to though. So I'm going to share my screen, David. If you could let me know if you could see the presentation, that would be wonderful. Can you see that?
Yes, I can see it.
Okay, no worries. So I'll just go through this, and David can tell me if anyone's interrupting with urgent questions or anything. Okay, happy for me to go, David?
Yes, please, Bruce.
Okay, so choosing a research question. So that you may be disappointed if you're expecting an answer to this question today. What I'm going to do, and I'm guessing Winnie will as well, is give you some tips on how to do things, and importantly, how not, maybe based on our experiences, how not to do certain things as well, which may help make this a better experience for you. Okay, so when you're choosing a research question, I guess I'm going to largely pitch this. I know it's the ECR group, so largely people may be thinking of doing a PhD or thinking of going for their first grant or an early stage grant. So if you're thinking along those lines, you must be interested in research, or you wouldn't be doing this, or you must be wanting to train initially as a researcher or to become a better researcher and to build capacity in yourself. Now, I think an early thing to ask yourself is why you want to do this. There are other academic careers you could do. You could be a more teaching focused academic that does less amount of research or whatever it might be. There are easier ways to make a living than being a researcher. You know, you have to think, why do you want to live on short-term contracts, different things like that. So, you know, you must really want this. You must be really interested in it. So what is it that you're interested in? What are you really interested in? Well, some people have a really clear idea already of what they want to do. Some people who go for a grant have their research question really clear in their mind, have a data set, have things sorted, go for it, need some funding to do it, to collect the data, or to ask some further questions, or to pay for the data, or to pay for some research help, and to go for it and have something really clear already in their mind. But I have to say, most people don't. Most people aren't that clear when they start thinking about something, about what it is that they want to do. Some are just passionate about the area. So they're really passionate about wanting to do something about inequalities or obesity or maternal care or whatever it might be, just really passionate about that area. But that doesn't necessarily mean there's room for a grant or a PhD. Okay, there has to be a gap in the market or some niche that hasn't been filled. Okay, and I think what you need to be thinking about, what difference will my research make? Okay, there's lots of great research questions out there, but what difference will my research make? It's really the so what question, you know, and it's quite a hard question to ask yourself. Is I'm doing this, but so what? You know, what difference does it make? What will it change? Why am I doing this? You know, and you really maybe get someone else to ask you some questions early on about your research question of why you're doing it, what difference it will make, and what it will change, what difference it will make, because you have to catch people's attention. There's a lot of people going for grants and PhD funding. Why are you different? What is going to catch the attention of the people funding these things? Okay. So it doesn't have to be everything, I think, is my message. If you're going into a certain research area, you don't have to worry about solving every problem, but it does need to be something, okay? Funding is really tight and it's only going to get tighter in the next 5 to 10 years. So you really have to have a clear idea of what you're going for, okay? And what your niche area is. So if it's a PhD, the first stage of a PhD in getting funding is often refining and identifying that gap through doing a literature review. And the same with grants, really. Ideas often change. They either change a bit or they change a lot, okay? And that's fine. It's part of your training and it's part of research. Stuff changes. We all have done research projects that either don't work or change, or the research question changes as you go along doing the research, but that's part of what research is. I think with a grant, you might want to try some small pilot work first to work up the research question. I think rarely do people get big money grants for large projects without ever having done any pilot work, with just some blue sky thinking about something that might work. okay? That's because grant bodies, having sat on a lot of funding panels, grant bodies want the latest cutting edge research, but at no risk whatsoever to that research not happening successfully, okay? So you've got to reassure them that you can do it and that it's a wonderful, great idea that's going to change the world, okay? So you've got to get that balance right. A slight aside really, but I think when you're thinking about your research questions and what you do, one of the best pieces of advice I was ever given was think carefully about who you'll be working with and the team you're putting together. It's really important. You'll be working with these people for a long time, possibly every day for a number of years. So there's probably another presentation to give on that, but just it's something just to bear in mind when you're thinking about going for grants and research questions. Now, there are courses on writing a research proposal, and there are books written on this, and some of them are really good. If you're doing a PhD, your first year module will usually include something about how to do research. There'll probably be some sort of course at the uni or wherever you are about writing a research proposal and writing a successful research proposal. The best thing you can do, I think, it's like doing exams, okay? It's like doing past papers. You would never go into probably never go into an exam without having read the past paper and trying to answer the questions successfully and practicing. Read some previous successful grants, okay? Then go and read some more successful grants, okay? I don't think you can do enough of that. You also need to focus on the grant bodies that you want support from, okay? Certain grant bodies don't fund certain things, okay? The more prestigious ones are often quite specific about the things they'll fund. Even when they put calls out for specific areas, there's certain things that they aren't interested in. Certain grant bodies aren't interested in funding anything to do with health economics. Certain ones are. Don't be afraid to talk to them. Call them on the phone, send them a message, talk to them well in advance. All big grant bodies have people who communicate with researchers and applicants and want to talk to them. They're very helpful and very useful to talk to, okay? Because you have to be pragmatic about the way you fill the form in as well, and what you say and the way you do it, okay? Ask them if they're really interested in the type of idea that you've got in the area of research you've got, okay? Have they funded similar things in the past? Ask them, talk to them, get a dialogue going. It's really useful. Talk to people in your department and your organization who've won lots of grants, okay? It's very hard. It's a 1 in 10 success rate if you're lucky, okay? It's difficult to do. We all learn the hard way, so avoid some of the pain by talking to people who've been successful and getting their experiences and learning from them, okay? It's a really useful thing to do. I think being practical as well, so once you've got your research question, you have to be pragmatic as well in terms of answering your question. You need that passion for sure. You need the gap, the angle that you're taking that's different. You need something to answer it with. That can be quantitative or qualitative data. Okay, you need something to answer the question with. What skills do you need? No one expects an early career researcher to have all the skills of the world. So either with a grant or a fellowship as well, you can skill yourself up in terms of capacity building, okay? With fellowships, that's often 50% of getting the money is what you say you're going to do about developing yourself. So half will be the research idea, half will be building skills in yourself. If you haven't got the skills, and we haven't all got all the skills, if you're doing a mixed method study and you're a quants person, get a qual person involved, get a statistician involved, get a mental health expert involved if that's what you're looking at, okay? Build the skill set that you need, okay, to get the question answered. Because remember, the grant body is interested in a team who can actually do the work, okay? Not just a great idea, but getting it done is really important. For a PhD, you need supervisors, you know, it's again part of the team who've also got the passion and the skills, but the time, okay? It's no good having 3 Nobel Prize winners on your PhD supervision team or on your grant, okay? If I'm in a funding body and there's someone super senior with 100 grants there who says they're gonna give a day a week, they're not, okay? Because they haven't got the time. What I do is think, okay, that's great. They'll give a fantastic overview and be a really good sounding board, but then they turn the page and think, Who's on the team is actually going to do the day-to-day cold-face work and get this grant done, okay? So be practical as well, okay? It's no good loading it up with super high-powered people and no one is actually going to do the work day-to-day. And you need to build your capacity as early career researchers to be the next Nobel Prize winners as well. When I say interview them, especially for PhDs and people you don't know on your grant, have a chat with them, have a conversation, and you're interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you, okay? So get that conversation going. You're going to have to work with these people as part of your team, okay? So, and work up the question with them, but as that process is going on, you're building your team capacity as well. Really important. It's always obvious on an application who hasn't spoken to each other. You can tell it when you read the application. Okay, so for a summary with the research question, you've got to be passionate about an area. Some things come with a question already, okay? Some grants that you have to work on and some PhDs come with a question, but you have to be interested in it, I think, and that comes across in the application if you're not super passionate about it. Talk to people, talk to potential supervisors and your grant team as well. If it's a fellowship, talk to other people who've won fellowships and what they did, and you'll be interviewed for certain fellowships and certain grants. So put the legwork in beforehand. Set off optimistically, of course, but questions change and that's fine. That's research. I say sometimes it doesn't work, quite often it doesn't work, and you have to change your question and what you do, and that's fine. Okay. Have realistic expectations. If you get all the grants that you ever go for, then fantastic, well done you, but you won't, okay? You won't get the first one. If I've said it'll take 2 or 3 goes, you know, it might take a lot more, and it might take 2 or 3 years to get your first significant grant or whatever it might be, okay? Be realistic in your expectations. It's not just you, it's all of us, okay? It happens to all of us, okay? It still happens to me all the time, okay? It's nothing to worry about, it's just what happens. Make your question appropriate for the funder. I think it's really important, okay? Once you've got the money, you can work specifically on certain things, but you have to get the money in the first place and get the grant and get things up and running and going, okay? Catch the funder's attention when you're writing things. You know, often if you're on a funding panel and you might say a great question, but then you begin reading the application and it's one you've read 5 times before, you know, it's very similar. You have to get the funder's attention, get the reader's attention on the panel and keep that attention as well. It's got to be really interesting and you've got to be interesting. You've got to be the person that catches the eye and think, oh, actually, I think they could do this. And it's really interesting. Might actually make a difference as well. So, you know, the writing of it's really important as well. It's very competitive. Keep the reader interested. I think that's really important. So I guess my messages are finally, it's got to be something interesting, obviously. It's got to be something different and a little bit new, not solving every problem, but something new that needs to be done. It's got to be practical. You have to be able to do it, okay? And it's got to make a difference. It really has to be something, not that changes the whole world, but changes the bit of the world that's significant and that is important to the funding body that you're going for, okay? So I hope that's helped a bit. As I say, there isn't a clear answer to this, and I think that's fine. If there was an answer, honestly, I probably would tell you what it is, okay? So, but I don't think there is a clear answer. There's just some tips and hints, I think, and talking to people and learning about it, going for it and refining it. I think that's the process that I would recommend that you go for. Don't forget about things like fellowships as well. A little bit different. That's kind of more building you, rather than answering the research questions. So happy to take questions later after Winnie's spoken as well, of course, and best of luck to you all.
Many thanks, Bruce, for a very interesting presentation. If I may, I will now introduce our next speaker, Professor Winnie Yip, who is Professor of the Practice of Global Health Policy and Economics in the Department of Global Health and Population at the Harvard School of Public Health. Professor Yip holds a PhD in economics from the MIT. Her research focuses on rigorous and policy-relevant health system evaluations and the design and testing of innovative health system interventions to improve equitable access to efficient and good quality healthcare. In addition to her academic appointments, Professor Yip is a member of the National Committee on US-China Relations and is immediate past president of the International Health Economics Association. She has served as an advisor to numerous international agencies, including the World Bank and the WHO. So without further ado, please, Winnie, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you very much. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, we can.
Great. So, well, thank you for organizing this, and also thank you for the wisdom of Bruce. As Bruce said, that there is really no formula, no magic bullet to this question of how to frame a research question. I think we are just here trying to share some of our experience and thoughts and leave plenty of time for you to ask questions. I come from it, perhaps wearing my hat as dissertation advisor and journal editors. So I'm just sharing with you your experience in terms of when I receive a paper, what goes through in my head that I think, oh, wow, this is a worthwhile paper to even bother the reviewer to review it. So that's what I will be doing. And I can share some guiding principles rather than specific method of doing it. I am going to share my screen, and I have trouble with my two monitors today, so I'm just going to share the this version, if that's all right, because once I change it, I might lose my video again.
We can see it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I want to echo strongly the point that Bruce has made. Gaps. When you ask a research question, when you try to come up with a research question, really the big test is, are you filling a gap? Is there a particular niche that you're trying to fill? So very often, I mean, my student comes to my office, or when I look at a paper, the first question I have is this paper answering a new question? What is the contribution that it is going to have in the literature? That's really going to be the main question that you have to keep asking yourself. If I'm going to do the following thing, am I making a contribution, right? So my students say, what do you mean by contribution? I said, well, before you know it is a contribution, you have to do your literature review. And you'll be surprised that a number of students do show up in my office and say, well, I think it's an important question because I think it is an important question. And I would sort of jokingly say, okay, this is the time that you have to put your ego aside. It's not what you think is most important. You have to justify to your professional colleague that this is an important question. And in order to do that, you have to do literature review. You have to identify the current boundary, the current frontier of that knowledge. Then you can ask yourself, oh, is my question new? So new in what sense? New, it could be you're discovering a new phenomenon, right? And that people have not discussed before. But of course, you should still have to justify this new phenomenon is important in what sense. So again, I tell the doctoral students, when you write your thesis, the second paragraph is the latest that you have to write this sentence. Or when you write a paper, the second paragraph should end with the contribution of this paper include the following. And if you somehow cannot answer that question yourself, then there is sort of raising some question about whether you're answering a new question. So what is new? What I would say is to just help you guide, is it a new phenomenon you're documenting? Is it a new explanation that no other people have actually looked at yet, but seems to be suggested by some secondary data or descriptive analysis that there is some new explanation? Is it a new mechanism that you are trying to prove or document? Now, of course, there could be new method as well. I actually think that for some reason, our training has been focusing students so much on new methods rather than new questions. And I think that needs to change, because that actually hurts in publication. I think a lot of editors, when they just look at a paper that comes in, what catch our attention is still, is this a new question? Rather than, is it just a new method? Because many of us are not trained as new methodologists. We're usually applying a better method to answer an existing question. And I call that there is diminishing return, right? So let's say the first paper that answered that question is just descriptive, but it has great value because it's new. And then over time, people would have improved the method. And we're increasingly seeing a lot of paper that we call sort of improving only on the margin, the method improvement, but answering the same question, producing the same finding. We don't find that very exciting, right? Because you're not contributing to the field, you're not contributing to the knowledge. The second way to think about significant contribution, maybe because it's more my background and area, is coming from the perspective of a policy question. Is this a new policy question? Is it addressing a debate in a particular policy? So trying to, when you're looking for question, looking for debate is a great way to look for new question, right? Because debate means that the question usually has already been generated, but you still have the pros or the cons not quite settled. And then you ask yourself, is it just because the data is not good enough, the method is not good enough, or is the debate not being settled because there are some underlying new explanation that has been ignored before, some underlying mechanism that has been ignored before. So here, just so this is just a few bullet points to help you question yourself. And I think, are you asking, how do you ask a new research question or even generate a research question? Really, it's a continuous question to yourself. Am I asking something new? Am I contributing to the new literature? Now, my second set of comment is, interestingly, the title of today's talk is asking a research question. But I'll tell you that very often students will show up in my offices. They don't even start with saying, my proposed thesis is to answer the following question. Always even ask yourself to say, what is the question that I'm asking? I think once you put yourself in that mode, is I'm asking a question that actually helps you to frame a question. If you're just saying that I happen to have a data set, so I want to do this analysis, this is so often that I have come across in terms of student supervision, and have to turn around and ask them, so what exactly is your question? Can you even write it down to just force yourself to say that the goal of this paper, the goal of this thesis is to answer this question or is to address this question. I think it's a discipline. It's a discipline. And then from that on, you can then ask yourself the next question, is this something new? And I would say, no matter how advanced in your career, I mean, even at this age, I still do that to myself. I feel that when I write a paper, if I cannot write down those two sentences, something is still missing in my paper. Now, in terms of types of question, I often find it helpful to classify into the what question, what is it, versus the why question, versus the how question, and versus the question sometimes we call so what, sometimes question we call the impact. I think in economics training, we're increasingly training a lot of people to answer the last question, that is doing impact evaluation and program evaluation, the impact of it. And we are a bit short. I think if you go look at the literature, we are short in trying to answer question of why and how. And I think partly is related to the method training that we have been given to students. We tend to do a lot of reduced form analysis rather than going back to sort of doing structural analysis, which helps more in understanding the whys and the hows. And a lot of times we do want to understand why. Why is there no impact? Or how is that impact being generated? And the first question, what, is a bit tricky. A lot of the questions, a lot of the what question tend to be descriptive analysis. And I keep telling students, don't underplay descriptive analysis. Descriptive analysis sometimes can be very valuable, especially if it is trying to just begin to discover a new phenomenon using descriptive analysis. Then the next stage can move on to more sophisticated methods. And please do not be confounded by sophisticated method means better question. No, they're separate things. And in fact, I said that new question quite often can be answered with simple descriptive analysis. But I want to say a few words about this what question. I have students coming to my office, I have received paper. The question is, the purpose of this paper is to look at what affects what, okay? This outcome. And this what is just really the question. And that tends to lead to an analysis of what I call a fishing expedition, right? A kitchen sink work. That is, I'm just trying to explore what might explain the variation in a particular outcome without specifying what are you looking at. I think that kind of question is bad, I would usually say, because what happened is that the paper tend to have throw in tons of variables that happen to be in the data set, and then you are just searching for the one that has a significant coefficient. And I call that fishing expedition, and that's that question. And most of the question, again, a discipline to yourself is you should ask yourself, can I put a hypothesis around it? Can I support my hypothesis with some theoretical foundation or even conceptual foundation? It's a way to validate that you have a question that is grounded rather than just very exploratory. You know, in journal, when we receive papers, I really hate it when someone writes something and say, the purpose of this paper is to explore something. Wow. You need to go beyond just exploring something. You can start with, I discovered this very exciting phenomenon, which on itself already established the value of the paper. But then the second part of the paper, I will begin to explore some hypothesis. Don't just send in a paper, which is, I'm just exploring, okay? And because it shows that you haven't really looked at what is in the literature and haven't identified what is going to contribute to the literature. And you have to understand the psychology of reviewers, right? There's so many journals nowadays. Everybody is being called to review paper. So reviewer pick and choose. So reviewers only want to pick and choose the good papers, the interesting paper. And so editor also go in our head and say, okay, is it going to be a paper that I'm going to have trouble finding reviewer? If I'm going to have trouble finding reviewer for this sort of like question, not so exciting question, I might as well reject it now. And so you also need to understand the editorial process of what gets through you to the first pass. My last set of principle, which is what again Bruce have already touched on, is really feasibility. And sometimes you might have a dream question, sometimes you might have such a huge big question, but it's not feasible. And when you are new to the profession, sometimes we err on the two ends. On the one end, we tend to focus on tiny questions. Tiny question, which is what I say is, I have an additional variable, I have a slight improvement of the method. It's a narrow, tiny question out of a bigger question. We tend to err on that side, or on the other side, which is, I'm stating such a grand question. But actually, the method, the theory, the data actually do not support it. So you have a paper which is, it started out being grand, but then very soon it just loses value. And I think over time, what you learn is the balance in between of asking new questions, but also feasible. And where do you strike that balance? That's all I have to say. And I think that those who are listening may say, oh God, you're just telling me all these principles. I'm afraid that it is really just some principles. But if you would take some of the questions that Bruce asked, that I'm asking now, and just really try to scrutinize yourself. It is really about scrutinizing yourself to say, is it new? What is the gap that I'm filling? What is that niche? Why would my reader find it exciting and interesting? And how can I convince my reader, right? Part of your job is also, if your reader didn't see it interesting, part of your job is you have to help convince them it is new and interesting. And the way to do it is you do have to tell people what is the knowledge frontier and why you're pushing that frontier knowledge. And so it's really, I think, it's disciplining yourself. So that's all I have to say. Maybe we can just open it for some discussion.
Great, Winnie. Thanks very much for really two very exciting and very impactful presentations. I'm really pleased to be here to hearing it. So I do certainly have some points, and I would like perhaps to rescue some of them before opening the floor. So I really like the point first that Bruce highlighted the importance of, yes, finding a good question, but also funding. We need some funding, because we can be we can have the greatest question in our desk, but then if we don't have the funding to either fund our PhDs or fund our postdocs or whatever, our small grants, then there's not this possibility to push the frontier. But then how can we push the frontier? And I think that the questions that you put in your presentation were really helpful and clear to start how to start identifying these questions. Like, let's read the literature, let's make clear that we answer these questions of what, why, how, and what's the impact. So I think that's very helpful for all of us, irrespective of the stage of our career. So on that note, I would like to open the floor if there's any comments or questions that any of the people joining us have. If you don't feel, yes, please, Winnie.
I'm wondering, since we have just not too many people, maybe people can even turn on their screen so we can just see each other and have some informal discussion.
Yes, that'll be fantastic. So if people are kind enough to turn your cameras, that it would be better than just speaking to a black screen. So yes, on that note, if you are shy enough to ask your question live, I'm very happy to read it from the chat, but would be great if you want to ask your question live. So the floor is open. Yes, please, Madison.
Hi, I'm Madison. I'm a PhD student at Oxford. And I think that a lot of the discussions around research questions kind of get at what is useful for policymakers and trying to find the balance of what is, say, a research question that's feasible within the scope of what we're looking at versus what's the question that policymakers are asking, which can be quite broad, or much more broad than what we can answer in a single question. So given that there's this policy dialogue, and it's really helpful to be in contact with policymakers throughout the research development process, how do you balance kind of going to them with a research question of saying, showing that that there's these gaps and there are these possible areas, but also leaving enough room open for them to interweave their experiences and perspective?
Winnie or Bruce want to take that first? Well, both of you can take them, but
you can go first, Winnie, if you want, or whatever.
it doesn't matter. So, you asked a very interesting question and also important question, but challenging question as well. I tell you, in my early days, when I present my work to policymakers, they often sort of said, you can just tell me the result. I'm not that interested for you to tell me all the debates, that little thing here and there. The second thing policymakers hate is, I have had a few instances, people say, you know what, you're telling me the result that the main result is this, but then you try to do an alternative specification, then there are some slight changes. It's so confusing, right? I think they're at a different plane. They're at a different plane. And so over time, I think that policymakers also depend on what level. The higher level policymakers tend to focus on big questions that sometimes is beyond a paper can answer it. And the best way to approach it is, I talk to policymakers a lot, is because it's talking to them that help me generate interesting ideas, right? They are the one who help me generate interesting ideas. But when you go back to them, then it is up to you to help them unpack his big question into some smaller question, and then say to what extent you are contributing to part of it. And so I think there's a lot about educating each other when you do policy dialogue, because they are on a different plane, right? They want big question. They actually want one answer. They hate it if we give them, here are the different alternative specification. They really hate it. I mean, one of them actually said that you really confuse me. So so when you're writing for a journal, we want all the details, examination, whereas for a policymaker, that's not what they're looking for.
Yep, I'd agree with that. I think it's good advice, is especially policymakers aren't just one lot of people. So we tend to think, oh, what's the policy on this? But of course, you have people interested, as when he said, you have service delivery people. So hospital managers are interested to very different things to people who work in a state, you know, as in the state that you live in, as in, or are different to federal government people. So they're interested in different things as well. So a hospital manager might be interested in a little bit more detail about what's happening and how, you know, should they build a new wing or should they do something interesting? Whereas other people might be interested in, you know, preventative measures, which might work in 5 years' time. You know, whereas people at national government level are interested in, as when he said, the very big picture, you know, of and I think the other thing to get across is they haven't, as when he said quite rightly, these people have no time, you know, they're very busy to people actually doing important things. And like, you know, they haven't got time to sit around and think like academics. So they actually have a job. So they have to go and do something. But also, I think you can, especially in early career stage, you can go in thinking, I've got a PhD. These guys haven't got PhDs. I'm going to have to dumb things down. You very quickly realize that actually they're the more intelligent people in the room and they know what they're talking about and they collect the data and know all about the data that you're going to use. And they understand statistics. They just want to know, they haven't got time to do the research or answer the question. They want to know what you can do what's the marginal benefit to them, to listening to you. And so you've got a good piece of research or a great idea. And as Winnie said, listen to them, it's knowledge exchange. So if they say, oh, that's interesting, you're very clever, but actually what I need to know is how to prevent this, whatever it is, happening in 3 years' time. What do I need to set up and the structures need to be put in place? You might have to change the way you think about your research question. So they don't need to know that something's bad, okay? But in public health, they know it's bad. What they want to know is what they can do about it. So really, I think talking very early, keeping the dialogue going, and in your niche, there might be certain people who are interested and certain people who aren't, and that's fine. So I think it's that there's no clear answer, but I think talking to people and finding out what they want answered is important.
So if I may follow up in that question, Bruce and Winnie. So if I am a PhD student, or if I've just finished my PhD student, my PhD, then who do I need to satisfy? So if it's the academic community, or is it the policymaker? Is it both? Is there a way of satisfying both? Is it just
as an early career researcher, as an early career researcher, you probably won't be going into the room with a lot of high-powered policymakers on your own to answer questions. What you need to do is like everything is go and sit at some meetings and watch and think, all right, that's what goes on. She's the important person I need to talk to about this. Then talking to other senior people you work with and getting involved. So it's like grants, you get on a grant as a co-investigator, then you work up maybe to be the principal investigator in 5 years' time. When you go to a policy meeting to find out about stuff, go to the meetings, learn first, take it in, and then talk to your more senior colleagues first and say, how do I get in to maybe make a bit of a presentation, see if I can get my questions answered. So, it's that thing of, but you've also in your academic career got to publish, teach, and do all the other stuff. But I think you can't ignore that policy knowledge exchange side of things. You can't, the ivory tower economist thing is gone, I think. I hope it has anyway, because it wasn't any use to anyone. So I think you need to getting out there and meeting people and doing stuff it really is, a third of your job now. It's not just publishing and teaching in academia. It's doing as well, and meeting and interacting, keeping that live as well, and learning about it. Going in, the state governor or the hospital chief exec isn't going to probably listen to what you say straight away, but they might after a couple of iterations of listening to you and learning and meeting you. And it's networking is an important thing as an early career researcher at every different level, I think.
Yeah.
Right.
No, I totally agree that I think that at different stage, we have a slightly different priority, and over time it changed. I mean, there are of course exceptions that some people will be doing a thesis, influencing policy, but I call that an exception. And sometimes during your dissertation phase, really your priority is your dissertation. And also establishing your identity, establishing the respect that you have in the professional field, that also increases the chance that a policymaker listen to you, right? I mean, how do they judge? I mean, in a way, they're also judged by, who is known, right? I mean, what do you mean by known? I mean, still at the early stage, you're still establishing yourself through publication, or if you have the opportunity to participate in policy conferences that are organized, let's say, by the World Bank, by the World Health Organization, key development partners be able to do a presentation. Those are different ways of how you get into, I'm speaking more about non-US, non-UK domestic policy. So that's how you sort of get yourself into it. But you sort of need to learn how to, I call it learning how to walk before you jump, and focus on doing a good thesis, publishing initially still.
Great advice. Thanks very much, both. Thanks, Madison, for a very fruitful question. Huh? And is there any other question, or if you, Madison, want to follow up on any of the points touched by either Winnie or Bruce?
Nothing to add immediately, but it's hugely helpful. So thank you very much for taking the time to do this today.
Is there any question by any of the other attendees? If not, I have a few. So, well, I will. Well, maybe while you think for your new question, I would like to follow up on one of the topics that Bruce was just mentioning now. Is you mentioned that we can, as early career researchers, we can either, I mean, it's, well, the way I see it is like a trade-off between you jump into someone else's project, into someone else's research grant, or you try to pursue your own fellowship, your own small grant as a new as a new investigator. So of course, there's this trade-off, because in the latter option is like your passion, your question, while in the first it's not necessarily the same. So is it worth the risk to deviate a little bit from what is your passion that you were talking in your presentation, Bruce, learning to the ropes, how to write a presentation, even if it's not your passion, or yeah, what would be your advice?
I think going for a fellowship, it's you. So you have, and you'll probably be interviewed. So you have to be. It has to be something you're immersed in and you really want to do for 3 or 5 years, because it becomes very apparent in the interview if you're not quite as interested as the person who I've just interviewed. Okay, so I think with that, but early career researchers often shy away a little bit from fellowships, I think, because it is just focused on you and there's a little bit of pressure on you. But often there not a huge number of people go for fellowships for different grant bodies. So I think it's an underused source of funding, whatever country you're in. There will be fellowship type options that you could go for and that are fruitful to go for. The benefit is it's hard to get, but once you've got it, it's highly prestigious. You do learn a lot, and it's building capacity in you as an individual. So it's a really good way of becoming kind of fast tracking yourself in research terms. Getting on grants, if you're in a large enough department with enough grants going in, you can get on the grant trail. And as we said, when you're on a grant giving bodies are a little bit risk averse. So they tend to give out the big grants to people who've had a grant before. So how do you get on that? Well, you kind of have to have had a couple of grants as a co-investigator to get on there. You might be passionate about the general area, but sometimes the specific grant is you as a smaller part of that, maybe as the economist on a public health grant or something else that's a bit bigger. So a lot of people go down that route of building it and going on grants at a certain level. And then maybe on the second, third, fourth one, becoming the second investigator, and then maybe the principal investigator with your own team of people around you. Okay, it's a bit of a longer process of going for it. But as I say, I do like the idea of, I remember I had a fellowship and it was, a wonderful 5 years of investigating stuff, because you're kind of self-employed for that time, and, you can head off and investigate wonderful things on your own. But then you then have to build that grant portfolio up for the time after your fellowship's finished. So it's not something I think you can avoid if you're in the research world, in the research business. You have to go for it. And you learn a lot as part of a bigger research team. You do see how other people do things and how they get things and how they go to policy meetings, as Winnie was saying, and you sit and look around and then you learn, and in a couple of years' time, you're the person leading that policy meeting and guiding the policymakers and asking them questions. So.
Yeah, thanks very much. Winnie, anything to add, or someone else? Another question?
On your point, whether it's fellowship or not, I actually think in our field, we're increasingly encouraging PhD students to actually do a postdoc. It wasn't the case when I was doing my PhD, but increasingly so, because it is actually getting more competitive. So the postdoc time, or if you get a fellowship, or that gives you another 2 years or so, get your thesis published, be protected from teaching in administrative work, to find a new idea that you can continue to do. Because when you find an academic job, you have to teach and you are given administrative duties. Even if you don't do academic jobs, then your job sort of take over the majority of your thinking time. I think what we are often confronted with is the lack of thinking time, the lack of quiet time to write, So the more you can sort of protect that at the earlier part of your career, right? So we were saying that, so the more you can allow yourself to land solidly, the more it is helpful for you for the rest of your trajectory. Because coming out from your PhD, you just finish, and then you immediately land on the job, then there are all the demands on the job, unless it is a job that is fully just asking you to do your own research, which actually doesn't exist that much anymore. And so fellowship, postdoc are actually really nice.
Thanks. No, that's very, very helpful advice. And I do have more questions, but I think for time, we will need to pretty much close the session unless there's a quick question from any of the audience now. Well,
but can I ask you a question?
Yes.
To the audience is, I mean, if even do you think that these kind of webinars, talks are actually helpful for you people at different stages of career? Or are we just saying things that, you know, your advisor has been drilling in your head all the time?
I'll just jump in and say that I think that this type of webinar is very helpful, and that this is the first time I've seen a webinar that kind of deals with that fundamental question that students are often starting with, you know, sort of as, you know, getting into a particular area of research. The questions will come from a lit review or kind of fall within a larger umbrella of what the research team that you're working with is already working on. And yeah, I've just found that in the past, there's not really that, say, any special training or explicit focus on how we can more effectively design research questions. So it's great to see a webinar like this and others that have kind of dealt with these core but unspoken questions that go into research. So thank you.
Oh, great to hear that is useful. And
yes, I think I also want to add that just now, I find this very helpful also because I'm planning to do my PhD, and currently I'm really stuck with finding a research topic and a research question. So just now I think with Prof. Bruce, he mentioned that you should just talk to the potential supervisors. I find that very helpful because, yeah, I think I'm kind of stuck here. So I think it's best for me to just, you know, start some conversation and see what we can do from there. And also for Prof. Winnie, some guiding principles just now, I think can really help me to, you know, just assess the research questions if I ever develop one. So I find this session very, very helpful. So thank you for this.
Great to hear. So if they are helpful and they continue to be helpful, then please continue watching the space. We'll be organizing a bit more of these webinars throughout the year, or maybe, yeah, we hope to squeeze one more before the year ends, and if not, early next year. Well, and on that note, noting that it's already 3 o'clock here in the UK, I would just want to thank speakers for this very interesting discussion. And I think that this last session after your very interesting presentation shows that we have a very, we all enjoy them and found it very helpful. So I would also like to thank everyone that joined us live and will be watching this recording. I hope they also found it helpful. And I would finally like to thank Jo Flavel from the University of Adelaide for her hard work on organizing this webinar. Sadly, due to the time zone in Australia, she couldn't join us today, but she was really the force that drives that make this webinar happen. And as I said, well, just watch this space. We will be organizing future similar events. We have webinars, we will have interviews, both with early career researchers and researchers in different stages of their career, to try to learn from each other. And well, see you next time. Many thanks for joining.
Thank you.
Okay, bye. Good luck to you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.